Hi there. My name is Scott Larson, and I am the writer, creator, and artist of the comic book series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. It is part history, part horror, and part action adventure, all rolled into one. And if you'd like to read a copy of issue number 1 for free, please feel free to email me at visitationscomicbook@gmail.com. And that is all one word. And the link is below in the comment section if you want to take a look in the description. And please feel free to email me and I'll send you a free PDF of issue number 1. So this is Will Eisner week. And one of the things that I found, Will Eisner is one of my favorite creators of all time. And there's a number of years ago where I was listening to different interviews on YouTube and different mediums, interviews with Will Eisner, interviews about Will Eisner, interviews with Scott McCloud about Will Eisner. And as you're going through YouTube and you go through the algorithms, different videos pop up. And this video of this female comic creator in England popped up. Her name is Karrie Fransman. And when it popped up, I was like, okay, well, let's see what this person has to say. And so I started listening to what she had to say and my jaw dropped. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, she really understands it. And the reason I say that is because Will Eisner, when he worked in the comic book community, his comic book career, he really tried to change things, and he tried to make it more literary, and he tried to do things with the artwork. And when I started drawing comics, I started doing the same thing because I was kind of following what he was doing, and I was always trying to do something different. And there's some things in Visitations that are different. For example, there's an issue that is fully painted, and it comes with a downloadable audio file. Which is the same story in the style of a 1940s radio show. And so when I saw what Karrie was talking about, and what she was doing was she was giving a talk about Will Eisner to a group of people, and I believe it was some kind of library convention or something. She'll be able to tell us that herself in a minute. But she understood it, and she was doing the same thing I was doing, where she wanted to take the medium and push it in a different direction. And she was creating sculpted, three-dimensional comics, and I was astounded. I thought there aren't many times when you meet a creative soulmate, but if there was, I would say that Karrie is one of them, because I was so impressed with what she was doing. The first thing that popped into my head was, I have to get to know this person. So just to tell you a little bit about Karrie before she comes on, she's been doing comics for a while, and she does independent comics in the UK, and she's been published in The Guardian, in Time Out, The Telegraph, the BBC, the New Statesman, and she's got a new illustrated book, and it's Gender Swapped Fairy Tales. And she's going to talk a little bit about that. So she's going to come on and talk a little bit about her career, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a relationship between her and Will Eisner's work. And hopefully you'll enjoy what we're doing here. So I'm going to bring Karrie on now. And hi, we can't hear you yet.
There we go.
How are you?
Great, thank you. I was really trying to remember when you were talking. I was like, when was that talk I did? And
there were a couple of different talks that you had done. And it's like I said, what really, really, really impressed me was not just that you were creating something completely different, but that you understood the concepts behind it. And people talk about Will Eisner, but they don't always talk about the concepts. And so but before we talk about him, I want to talk about you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started doing comics?
So I think I came from a slightly different angle, and maybe that influenced a little bit about the medium for me. But so I grew up, reading the Beano, which is what lots of kids read in the UK, and then I would do drawing pictures without officially calling them comics. I did do some comics when I was little and tried to copy the Beano and do my own stories. But actually, often I think I thought that what I was doing was like bad animation. So I'd like tell a story in my head and I draw lots of different pictures, but I didn't really understand about sequential art and panels and speech bubbles. And then my parents were like, didn't really want me to go into an art degree. So they recommended that I do an academic degree. So I ended up studying psychology and sociology at university, but I never stopped drawing and in fact, I studied psychopharmacology and I drew all of my notes. They were all like little pictures of, serotonin and all of these little things that I could only make sense of in drawing. And then I remember the first proper graphic novel, I guess, which I read as a adult was Ghost World by Daniel Clowes. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a gateway drug for a lot of women comic artists, because it was such a good depiction of female friendship. I think like he did it absolutely beautifully. And I think I was introduced to it in a really mainstream way. Like I remember going to the cinema with my sister to watch the film, and then going into like a bookshop, not even a comic shop. And they had, a section with maybe 3 comics in it. And one of them was Ghost World. And because I'd watched the film, I was like, I should read the book. And I remember finishing it in one sitting and literally just thinking, that's it. This is what I need to do with my life. Like it was a light bulb moment. And I called my sister, who's really like a fantastic writer. And I was like, we need to make comics. These are amazing. We need to do this. And she just kind of didn't really get into it. And I just was so obsessed. I just had to do it myself. And I couldn't stop. It was like getting bitten by a rabid dog. And I've been infected ever since with it. So that's my kind of, I guess, origin story with the medium.
So what did you start with?
Good question. Okay, so I remember going to a convention, my first convention. And I think before then, I'd maybe drawn like 3 comics. I remember writing one for an ex-boyfriend, Valentine's Day. It was kind of like a bit of a depressing comic. It was called My Duvet Boyfriend, and it was about an unemployed duvet who stays at home all day. And the girl goes out to work and comes back and the duvet is just there on the bed, which was a little bit of a passive-aggressive commentary in our relationship. But he seemed to like the comic, and I drew one about a kind of scary man with ballerina legs called Twinkle Toes. I can't remember. Oh yeah, and then I did a comic about I used to wear a hearing aid. I had a hearing loss when I was a child, and I told everyone at school that it was a supersonic secret sensor and that I could hear everybody's secrets if I turned it loud enough. So those were my 3 comics. And then I went to a comic convention and it was, I think, a web and mini comic zine festival. It was like in a little church hall, and there was, maybe 30, 40 tables. And I just went there and just talked to people, and it was so exciting. And at the time, there wasn't very many women in comics. So I remember chatting to some people doing anthologies, and they saw my comics and said that they put them in the anthology. And I was just so excited. And everyone was like, I remember somebody said to me, like, welcome to the community. And I was like, oh, these are my people. I found my people. So yeah, I mean, and then I just started doing that. I would book a table at a convention, and then I would try and create a little zine, comic in time for the next one. So I did them in that way, and yeah, until I realized I had to do it full time and professionally, and then that's another story.
So you started out with Daniel Crowe's Ghost World, and then what did you read after that? What else? Where were your inspirations coming from besides that first one?
It's a good question. I'm trying to remember what I was reading. It was mostly like indie. I mean, obviously, I quite quickly got onto Scott McCloud, understanding comics. I would go. There was like one comic shop. I was a bit intimidated because it had like, all the plastic, pristine comic things, and you couldn't like touch it, and you didn't know what you were doing. And there was, some snooty person behind the till, and everyone stared at you if you're a girl going in there. So it was still a little bit like inaccessible. I felt a little bit intimidated. But I went to I would read all my friend comics, first of all, like at the conventions, which was brilliant. And then I would go to, I think I'd go to like Waterston's, and they started having a little comic section mostly. And Foyle's had quite a good comic section, and I would read like mostly the graphic novels. But I do remember being really influenced by Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics very early on, and that was when instantly I read that book and I was like, how can I experiment? If I make this, is that a comic? If I make that, is that a comic? So I was, he's got that definition of what he elaborates on Will Eisner's definition of sequential art as a comic. And I think I used to be able to quote it off by heart what Scott McCloud's definition was. But
let's see, I have the book right here.
Understanding Comics, we can find it. It's that page which looks like a dictionary. Let me try and remember.
It's funny. I can tell you my story about this book. I had bought this book when it came out, but it took me a couple of years before I read it. And when I actually read it, I was doing it for a class. And it had all kinds of different fine arts stuff, fine arts history and the history of modern art. And I saw the tie-in between that and this. Yeah. So while I look for the definition here, so you started with McCloud.
Yeah, really early on, I found McCloud, and my family all kind of academics, so it really suited me to have a kind of intellectualized experience. And I remember like quite early on, they had like an academic comic conference in the UK at Birkbeck University, and you could go for free, and it was like going to comic university. So people would give talks about comics and architecture, or comics and Middle Eastern propaganda, and it was like so exciting because you could just sit there with your pen and paper and just get so much interesting research on the medium. So I really got into it that way. And then I'm trying to remember what kind of books I was reading, but Scott McCloud was such a big influence, I think, for what I was thinking about. And I remember one of the first comic experiments I did was a folded up comic, and the story literally unfolded. So it started up like that, and then you fold it up, you got 2 panels, and then you fold it up and you got 4 panels, and then you fold it out and you have 8 panels. And that was like, just the fact that you could make a little unfolding story. That was one of the first things I did. And then I started trying to I was thinking, well, can I fit a comic in a jewelry box, or can I fit a comic in a doll's house? Or my husband, he's a digital wizard and experimenter. So he got the first iPad, and it had an accelerometer in it, which detected the angle you tilting the iPad at. And he was like, we could create something where you were tilting the iPad up and down, and it looked like you were looking through a window. And so we created this comic called The First Witch, which you had to read by doing this. And it was kind of like you were looking up at a building when you held it up there, and as you held it down, it was like you were looking down on the ground. So the perspective was kind of right. It really killed me trying to do it right. But we were just playing around with all the different things which came up. I mean, when virtual reality came out and Tilt Brush came out, I managed to get in with these guys who had the kind of virtual reality internet cafe in Camden, and they said that I could come there and practice. And then I was like, the technology had been out for like 6 months, and I was like, I need to create the world's first virtual reality comic. So I mean, it's a lot of work though doing VR comics, because you have to draw in immersive worlds constantly. I don't know, any emerging technology, I'm always thinking, can I fit a story in it? And how did it work? So,
really quick. So, really, let me read the definition to you.
Oh, yeah.
It's juxtaposition
and deliberate imagery.
Deliberate sequence intended to convey information and
or produce an aesthetic response in the viewer.
That's right. I'm very impressed that you actually memorized that.
I didn't even memorize it. It's on a slide. It's a slide on my talk, and I read it so many times that it got stuck in there. But my brains tend to mush since having a baby, so I can't I can't remember things like I used to. But it's an interesting definition, and I don't always agree with all of it in its entirety. I mean, I think deliberate sequence is, for me, the problematic word, because it doesn't have to be deliberate sequence. I mean, there's some hyper comics. I don't know if you know the work of Daniel Merlin Goodberry, but he's a UK-based comic artist who very early on was experimenting with comics, saying, can I make a game, a point scoring game, which is also a comic? And he did some kind of animations and comic experiments as well. But he was part of an exhibition called Hyper Comics, and that's from the idea of hyper narrative. You know, when you read these choose your own adventure books in the 80s, and they said, you're in the forest and you're going to fight a dragon. If you want to fight the dragon, turn to page 8. If you want to run away, turn to page 32. So that's an idea of hyper narrative, where you can control your path through the story. And there was a whole exhibition in the UK curated by Paul Gravett, who's quite a well-known comic curator and journalist. And he got artists, Dave McKean was one of them, and Daniel Merlin Goodberry was another, Warren Pleath. And they were all creating comics which had some form of hyper narrative. So you could, Dave McKean's one, you were reading the comics on the wall, and then they went down the floor, and then they divided into 2 paths, and you could choose the left path or the right path. So you had some kind of, the sequence wasn't deliberate, it was more random. And I created a comic which randomized a series of panels, and they could be read in many different ways. So again, that's not deliberate sequence. So anyway, we're getting technical now.
No, that's okay. So let's back up real quick, but I want to know more about what you just said. But before we do that, let's back up real quick. Now, you had something you said where you were looking, where you would have to look through. How did you...
It was called we called it a tilt comic, because you tilted it up and down to read it, and it was literally, you had to get a workout by reading it, and it was only a few pages long because we just wanted to experiment. Right. It was called The First Witch, but I don't think it's on the App Store anymore, because it was literally created, I can't remember the date, it would have been, I want to say like pre-2000 and maybe 2011, maybe even earlier, whenever the first iPad came out. So we've been, we most recently, the thing which we made recently was a Eternal Zoom comic, which, you've all seen that trick, which they sometimes do in movies and music videos, like the White Stripes music video, when you zoom into the image continuously. Have you ever seen it? And like the middle is just getting bigger and bigger. Right. And I'd seen this technique used a few times, but I've never seen it used for narrative. So me and my husband collaborated with this organization called Positive Negatives, to tell the story of Eritrean refugees' journey from Eritrea to the UK. And it's done in this eternal, we called it like an eternal Zoom comic. So I was drawing images which were slowly being enlarged, and 8 images were placed on top of each other, but it gave a sense of continuously moving into this image. So you go on the journey with the refugees through Sudan, through Libya, to the UK, on trucks, on planes, on the back of lorries, on rubber dinghies across the Mediterranean, and you're just being drawn into the journey. Again, that's an example of using an emerging technology, but seeing, can we put a narrative in it? And the first time you can kind of merge those. I'll put links on the bottom of it, or send you links.
Yeah, no, and that's great. Yeah, please do. So do you think, all right, so there's a number of different questions I have for you. So the Tilt comic was all digital, and you would sell it through an app store?
Yeah, it was sold originally. Yeah.
Okay. How did it?
It was more like, I don't know if it was sold. I think we gave it away for free, actually.
Okay. Did people get it? Did they understand what you were doing?
I remember, I think Scott McCloud gave it a shout out at some point.
Oh, did he? Okay.
On our bucket list.
That's exciting.
If Scott McCloud liked it, we're happy. But it wasn't like, it was just an experiment. It wasn't like a long series or anything. Right. We were just wanting to show what you could do with the medium. But that's kind of what I like, if I can do something short form, which is experimental and looking at something in a new way and pushing the boundaries. then for me that is yeah, that's what I want. I want to be learning with every project I do.
I have to tell you something. You put me to shame. I'm listening to you and I'm like, holy crap. And the Zoom comic. So is that, are people buying that? How is
No,
that?
that one was just commissioned by Positive Negative. They're such an interesting
Okay.
organization. They're part of SOAS University in the UK, run by this amazing, like, absolutely energetic guy called Ben Dix. But what they basically do is they're trying to combine comic artists and animators with academics and charities and non-government organizations, and researchers. So normally an academic or a researcher would be in a dusty room typing out their report, and it would go in a library and no one would ever read it. But by combining comics, you can create research and information which can reach a much wider audience. So he's worked for clients like the UN, and we've done stuff for charities. And for this one, it was actually just based on research they'd done with interviews with Eritrean refugees to Europe. So I took the interviews, created this thing, this eternal Zoom comic, and it was for them. Usually we have another client involved, but he commissioned it for Positive Negatives. And then it went into art gallery that was displayed in House of Illustration and the Imperial War Museum in the UK, and shown in I think 12 different countries. And it was also presented at got invited to The Hague in to talk about it. So it had a life of its own, and it's traveled quite extensively itself. But it's an interesting thing, because if you look at it, you might say it's an animation, because it looks like an animation. It looks like it's moving, but it wasn't created with any animation. There are 80 still comic frames, but the program just makes them grow slowly and overlaps them, so it looks like there's movement there. But yeah, that's on one of those things which I quite like it. I did an experimental exhibition of comics in Belgium, and I had all my comic sculptures and photography comics and virtual comics. And I remember getting to lots of debates, because a few people said, no, the most important thing about a comic is the print, that it can be printed and distributed widely. There's a lot of debates about what is the comic. And I think Scott McCloud's definition, I like Will Eisner's. Sequential art is quite succinct.
Mm-hmm. I think that, the thing about something being in print, the truth of that is probably within the next 20 years, that's all going to go away.
Yeah.
It just is. And if you're taking comics and putting them just into print, you're going to lose out.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting though, because I've got a little slide sometimes which I talk about when I talk about people like William Hogarth, who was painting huge, giant paintings and putting them on the walls of art galleries. And then he democratized it by making etchings and turning it into print, which people could own a William Hogarth comic and distribute it, and it was democratized. But then, now we have comics as beautiful coffee table books, which can be quite expensive. But then at the same time, comics have moved online and they're accessible and cheap and democratized again. So I think comics are brilliant at moving through different kinds of mediums, but always remaining really, they can be fine art. If we want to put them on a gallery wall, we can. But ultimately, they can also be really widely distributed and available for everyone, regardless of how much money you have or your education level.
So I want to mention something, and I had talked to Danny Fingeroth last week, and he's the chair of Will Eisner Week, and I was telling him about your work, and I said, she was involved in this book that was independently produced and then published through IDW called Hey Amateur. And
Hey Amateur, yeah.
It was a 9-panel, you guys were supposed to do a 9-panel story, and you did something on mindfulness. And the way I understood it, and the way everybody understood it in that book, with the exception of maybe 5 of you, was that it was supposed to be a Steve Ditko-esque, like 3-panel. And I was laughing to myself when I saw yours, because you played with the panel frames. You're at the end of it, the panel disappeared and like went off into the ether. And I was laughing because I knew what you were doing. And you were going full like Will Eisner on it. And it's not just because I understand your work, but I also know what when I was learning comic art and I was looking at Eisner and I was studying what he was doing, there's certain little tricks that he does. And I always try to plug those into my work. And I noticed that you had done that. And it's like I said, I was chuckling to myself because I'm like, she's going Eisner on this. I can see it. It's all over this. So talk a little bit about Will Eisner. How did you find him?
Well, it's difficult because I'm not like I mean, I feel like I'm still new to this, and I'm like not super. I'm learning all the time, and I'm not super clued up on Will Eisner in a lot of ways. But I found Will Eisner through Scott McCloud, right? And that definition of what it was, and I got his book of essays. I can't remember. I think it was called like Graphic Stories or something like that. Very early on, orange cover. My brain's like a bit a bit eroded. But yeah, I mean, I think I was mostly interested in, like you said, like experimentation, which he'd done. But I search really widely now. They were the kind of a springboard for me.
Sure.
But now I will look and see comics in all sorts of different areas, and my definition of what a comic is encompasses all different things. I'm doing a project at the moment with Canterbury Cathedral, and they've got stained glass windows, and we're telling comic stories based on the stained glass windows. And obviously, if you start looking back historically, you can see people experimenting with what Will Eisner would have called sequential art from way back when. I mean, you've got the Bayeux tapestry, Trajan's column, you've got stained glass windows, and again they were doing the same things. Like they were talking to people who were illiterate, who were walking past the church, who couldn't read the text, but they could look up and see the pictures in sequence and understand the story of the saints or Jesus or pilgrims. So it's weird because in a way it seems innovative and modern to do virtual reality comics or to put a comic in a doll's house, but if you go farther enough back, people were doing that already, right? So I'm just going back there and seeing what they did and seeing if we can do it again.
Well, it's, if you go into any Catholic church, there's the Stations of the Cross that surround the church. And it's, it's a story of the crucifixion. And that's exactly what it is. It's almost like a silent comic strip.
Yeah. Yeah, I love finding them. I'm such a geek. I love finding, things which wouldn't consider themselves comics and saying, that's a comic, that's a comic. Someone sent me, I've got some really great examples when I do talks about experimental comics of things I found. But yeah, there's one which is on a box, on cubes, like dice, and you could roll them and different stories are told. I found a typographic comic by Ray Fenwick, which is just a conversation between two people in speech bubbles, but you never see the people, but you can tell so much about the characters by the way the typography is written in their voices. I found a comic which is across a series of windows, which was in Edinburgh, and it's about people who used to live in the town, but they actually cut out paper cuttings and put them in the windows. There's so much you can do. It's like endless, the possibilities. But I really like, so yeah, if anyone's watching this and they're like, oh, I know of a really strange comic which experiments in this way, then send it to me because I totally geek out on those kind of things.
Tell us about your three-dimensional comics.
Wow, I'm trying to think what I've done most recently. I mean, because I've been doing, okay, so the last thing I did, I don't know if it's a comic. This is one of those things which is definitely on that end where animation is here and comics are here. It's toward the animation end. So I got asked to do an animation, but I don't know how to animate. I have done some animation, but I usually collaborate with an animator, Adam the Gadlow, who's brilliant. And I'll do the picture, then he'll make the moves. But this project, it didn't have big enough budget, and I said I'm going to do it myself. And I created a pop-up book. So I was like, I'm going to create a book which I can make the little bits move, and I can move the different elements, and then I'm just going to film my hand presenting it in a way. And so it's not actually released yet. It's with Positive Negatives again, and an organization called MyDeck, which researches into migration and looks at kind of dispels myths. It's an explainer animation. Again, I don't know if it's an animation or a pop-up book, but it's something between there. So I had so much fun researching it, and each one of the pages had a little mechanism which you move and explain something to do with migration. You can pull a string and the world spins round, or you unfold an accordion thing, and I can't explain it. I'll show it to you at some point when it's out. But again, it was really good fun because I got to go down that whole wormhole of researching moving books, which were a massive thing in like the turn of the century. There were loads of movable books, and it doesn't seem to be something anymore. We know about pop-up books, but movable books had these really complicated mechanisms where you'd pull a tab and like it would make this move, but then that would go round, and then that, I couldn't figure them out. It was a bit of a...
How do you market something like that? I mean, so for someone like me, and actually you talked about the pop-up books. That was one of my early ideas for visitations. And it was just like, I can't afford to do that. If you're trying to put something together. And so one of the things I thought about, and I'm not there yet, is doing it to where I would create it, and then whoever bought the book would have to cut it out themselves and like put it together.
That's nice. Yeah.
Would have to create it. But how do you market a 3-dimensional comic? Or do you just do one and you just take it around and show people, and then you go?
Yeah, well, you can. I think that's the thing, isn't it? You've got potential. Now we've got the internet, and you can, like, I made my husband a Valentine's Day pop-up card, and I put it up on my Instagram. There's ways which you can take the medium and put it up in on social media, and then it's got a different kind of life. Or displaying in an art gallery or whatever. I think the in terms of marketing, the way I've managed to make a career with comics is always to find the people who have the stories which need to be told, and then to use comics to tell those stories. So you can find, depending on what story you want to talk about. I mean, I'm really interested in migration and, exploring kind of political, socio, humanitarian issues. And that's great because I collaborate now a lot with Positive Negatives. And they'll be the middleman in a sense and find me great clients. Mm-hmm. And then now we've got a good working relationship. They'll trust me when I say, I'm going to make this into a pop-up book, or I'm going to do this Eternal Doom thing. And they kind of enable me to do that. But with other people, like with the Hey Amateur, I mean, it's an anthology. They want a range of different stuff. And if you're the oddbod who's going to do it a bit differently, they quite like that because they've got,
right.
They've got more of a variety. So yeah, it's difficult though. I know what you mean. It's not such an obviously marketable way. And people never come to me and say, hey, make me one of those experimental things. They come to me and they say, you've done comics about refugees, or you've done historical comics, or, how do I engage a mass audience? It's usually their question. And then if you can prove that your mechanism can do that, you're onto a winner. I think like with, that Eternal Zoom comic I'm telling you about, where the interesting thing about that mechanism was it really created empathy because you felt like you were on the journey. You were literally being pulled along into the middle of this picture. And with the pop-up book, I created the book. So every time I'm turning a page, you're waiting to see what's on the next page. So in a way, the mechanisms really engaged the audience, and it was almost not deliberate. Like I wanted to do that thing. And then in retrospect, I was like, hey, I mean, one of the good tests for the pop-up book was I played that film to my my daughter, who's 3 years old, and she watched it till the end. And it's not for 3-year-olds, it's for adults. It talks about complex theories of migration and inequality. But she was like, what's going to happen on the next page? Ooh, that thing's going to move, and it's bright colors. So if you can prove that your medium can engage people and make them really pay attention, then you can kind of do it your own way, I guess. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I work flat, because there's the only way you could do it. And I did a comic where you would read it, and you can't do it digitally because digitally it would like correct it, but you have to turn the book in order to read the story.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was I was in a bookstore and I found this book about World War I, and you open the book up and it's one great big scroll that like I think I actually like pulled it out throughout the entire store, and I was like down at like 2 aisles, and I'm like, all right, I need to.
Wait, was that Joe Sacco's Constantine?
Yes.
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 Yeah, that's amazing. And that was based on the Bayeux Tapestry, which was again one continuous scroll about the Battle of Normandy. Yeah, so he took his influence from ancient comics and produced something which was totally amazing and original, right?
But I was like, oh, I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, I can't do that because it's going to cost too much. So I'm going to do this instead. So I'll make people turn the book. But I think that when you go flat, you have to use your imagination a little bit differently because you are limited. But sometimes, and I'm just talking right now, but sometimes those limitations will help you think about things in a different way as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like I always say when I'm teaching workshops that you create your boundaries and then you allow people to play within them. So if your boundary is this story has to be told between two flat covers of the book, you can instantly think, well, what happened if we held those pages up to the light? What happened if we ripped those pages? What happened if parts of the pages could unfold? What happened if we could Constantine the page round into like, an entire unfolding book? I'm always like buying these sorts of pop-up books and things. Like, in fact, I've just got one here. This one's quite a nice one. It's like folds right out. Whoops. It's like Alice in Wonderland.
So
it's like, you get a whole scene which folds flat into a book, right? I mean, okay, that's pop-up, and pop-up is complicated, but you can do things very cheaply and very easily. I can hear my daughter trying to get into the room. Definitely could happen. But yeah, you can do things, even if your boundary is flat, even if you can't do pop-up, there's so many things you can play with and you can experiment with. I think a really inspiring person, aside from Will Eisner, to look at experimenting with the art form is Winsor McCay, because Winsor McCay was creating comics in the turn of the century, and he uses the panel and the speech bubbles. There's that famous one when in Little Nemo in Slumberland where the bed grows these really long legs and starts moving around, and it's like the panels become really long and thin to show that vertigo feeling as the bed is moving. And then there's another one in Little Nemo in Slumberland where the people start shouting and the speech bubbles get bigger and bigger and they push the people out of the panels. They're literally taking up all their room. So he was taking the very medium which he was creating, the panels and the speech bubbles, and he was playing with them and saying, where's the boundaries? What can I push? So yeah, there's potential to do it everywhere. I think my main thing with experimenting is it shouldn't be experimenting for the sake of experimenting. It should always help the narrative in some way. Otherwise it jars. It seems clever, but for what purpose? And I remember someone saying that the three things you need in a good artwork is head, hand, and heart. So the head part is the clever thing, like, oh, what happens if we do a comic on a guitar? Or maybe we can do it like, that's sequential. We could have 3 beads on a necklace and it could be a narrative on a necklace. There's lots of clever things you can come up with, but why? So then you have the heart, which is the emotional connection. What's the story about? How is it going to engage people? And then you have the hand, which is the craft. How are you going to craft it beautifully? And if you can get all 3 of them, you've hit the absolute sweet spot.
Do you want to talk real quick about the gender swap fairy tales?
Yeah, you know what? Gender swap fairy tale, apologies, is not a comic. But it is experimental, and it's kind of using technology and, you know, illustration to create something completely different. Actually, I've got all of my comics here, my graphic novels. This is The House That Groaned, and that's an experimental thing because I used that front cover. So you can look in through the windows and then like basically see what's inside the house there. So again, it's playing with voyeurism, which is what the book's kind of about, and it gives you a little hint into everybody's life and the skin and then what's underneath the skin kind of themes. So I then carried on that theme with my second book, which had nothing to do with the first one, but I used the die cut cover, and this was experimental as well, this story. It was all about five artists who go and have a retreat, and I was one of the characters in the book, and it's written by 5 different friends, so it's like an anthology. The styles are very different, but the twist in it is that I created all of the artwork pretending to be 5 different artists. So again, that's another playing with the medium of anthologies. What happened if it looked like an anthology but you had created everything in it, and how can looking at different people's artwork tell you about who that person is. So then Gender Swap Fairy Tales is the non-comic, and that was published by Faber and Faber and co-created with my husband Jonathan Plackett, who's a techie whiz kid. So that was basically, Jonathan started off with the inspiration. He created a computer algorithm which swapped gender in text. So it turned the word he to she, it turned king to queen, it turned Mrs. to Mr. And he was like, what am I going to do with this algorithm? And I said, why don't we apply it to public domain fairy tales? They're really gendered stories, but fantastic stories. So what happens if we put them through the algorithm? What comes out? So we got to read these stories for the first time ourselves. The computer did all the work. We didn't touch anything. We didn't rewrite them. And, you know, there were some things which we thought would be predictable, like princesses racing to rescue sleeping princes. But then there were so many new characters which we really hadn't thought about, like had the Handsome and the Beast was the gender swapped version of the story, and it's about you know, this character Handsome who's forced to look past the flaws of this beastly ugly woman who's really angry, and he self-sacrificed to his mother and then to her. So it becomes this completely different story, and it was so much fun, like drawing all these, you know, massive aggressive women and lots of pretty teenage boy princes, really, which is a bit strange to draw. But it was just really, it's again, like just using technology to get people to view things in a different way. That was Little Red Riding Hood. And I was getting influenced by each of the illustrations. They were influenced by the centuries and the countries from which they originated, which was really good. So each of them, the very different color palette, and was really good fun to draw and research. And that's the end papers. So yeah, that's done really well. This has probably been my most commercial project. We've sold foreign rights in all sorts of many different countries, and it's really interesting seeing it develop and how people pick up on it. But what the interesting thing about this book is it's not been very divisive, because I mean, we live in a society where everybody's, you know, on either side of the debate. But with this book, regardless of if you've never thought about gender before or if you're a non-binary person, it starts examining how gender is evident in characters, the stories we tell, the language we're writing in. And it opened up a discussion for anyone to have, regardless of whether they've thought about it or not. And we're not preaching because we haven't rewritten anything. We've just done the swap, and it's now for you to do the analysis yourself. So yeah, it's been great, like seeing the response for that and kind of observing what people notice themselves.
That's really cool. So I'm going to ask where people can find you, but before I do that, because I know that you're running short on time here.
Yeah, my daughter shouting in the background.
It is Will Eisner week. What is your favorite Will Eisner story?
Oh my God. You've got a spirit, haven't you, at the back?
Yeah, I've got.
I know. I was reading them and trying to remember.
Yeah,
Spirit is pretty good. But
I,
I am a massive fan also of his essays, which he wrote. But I can't remember the name of the book. I'll try and find it. It's something really like, not such a creative title, like graphic storytelling, but that really inspired me originally.
oh yeah.
Where
is that?
It was an orange cover when I had it, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's right here. I didn't have room for.
Yeah, that's it. Graphic storytelling, and that had some of his experiments as well in it. A bit shorter.
Right. Well, he does a lot of stuff from the life on another planet in here.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
So this is your favorite work of his?
I think that's one that had the biggest influence on me.
Okay. Any stories?
Yeah, I think did he not do The Spirit?
Yeah, he did do The Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I mean, I haven't read them for so long now, so I'm like just thinking like, I'm sure I've got more recent readings, but yeah, like I said, I've had a kid and my brain just turned to mush.
Sure.
I can't remember one from the other. But I'm a big fan, and I've I think what he did, which others maybe, I think Scott McCloud has taken on that and developed with that kind of joy for the medium and experimenting. What's your favorite?
Mine is The Dreamer, which.
Oh, The Dreamer. I've seen bits of it, but I don't think I've read it in its entirety. I don't own it in its entirety.
The thing about this is it's basically his early life as a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And the first thing I had ever gotten was the comics and sequential art. And I had been, for a long time, I had been sending samples out. And when I would get rejection letters, I would get like, oh, you need to be reading comics and sequential art. And I didn't know what it was. I never heard of it. And I didn't know who he was. And I had gone to the dentist, and it was in like one of the suburbs of Chicago. And I was waiting for the train to take me back home. And there was a comic book shop. And so I walked in there and I was like, oh, there's that book right there. So I grabbed it and I just read it and read it and read it. And it was about the time when I had met different illustrators in the business who had helped me out quite a bit. And that's a whole different story. But I always kept my eye out for Eisner stuff after that. Yeah. And I think The Dreamer was the first thing. I had a friend who worked in a bookstore, and I saw it, and I read it. I didn't even bother buying it. I read it, and I liked it so much that I bought that, and I bought The Building, which is the story about about this building in New York. And I really, the Spirit stuff is great. And it's groundbreaking, and he does all that stuff with the typography, with the titles. Yeah. But the stuff I'm drawn to is the autobiographical stuff.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm the same. There's nothing. It's funny because for whatever we say about experimenting and everything, there is something about a human story. Storytelling in itself is really simple, and we are so compelled to hear. I mean, I'm the same. I love autobiography, and autobiographical comics. There's just that ability of comics to draw you in, and it's a human story. We don't need that much complicated stuff. We just need a story which we emotionally connect with. And I do think comics are brilliant at doing that, autobiographical comics.
Well, there's a convention that's in Maryland and in the United States. And I'm drawing a blank on what the name of it is. They send me information all the time, but it's basically a lot of independent creators who go, and not independent like superhero creators, but independent like, this is my life, this is my biography, and it's everybody's an artist, so it's all angst-ridden stuff. And I've never gone, but I know that he used to go. It's the XPX convention. Small Press Expo is what it's called. Yeah. And I know that he's gone to that, and I know Jules Pfeiffer has gone to that. Eisner is gone now. He died in 2005, but he would go to that, and he would walk around and he would see what everybody was doing.
Yeah. I mean, they're the best. That's the kind of comic conventions which we have in the UK. A lot of autobiographical stuff, lots of independent creators. We were just saying that before. weren't we, about it, like the non-commercial conventions. They're definitely my tribe. I absolutely love that. I love going and seeing, it's just like how can it really is your own worldview, which you can capture in a comic, and you can show someone the world theme through your eyes in a way which you can't with any other medium. And it's lovely because these comic artists like bare their souls in such a gorgeous, unpretentious, vulnerable way. It's really nice.
I think that
I was about to say, I can see with the time it's 1:30. My daughter's gonna
okay. Yes.
It's been such a pleasure chatting to you. I could geek out on this stuff all day.
Okay, so let's wind it up here. Stay on for a second. Where can people find you?
Okay, so it's Karrie Fransman, KARRIE FRANSMAN, and that's on Twitter, Instagram. I'm at Karrie Fransman on Twitter, at Karrie Fransman on Instagram, karriefransman.com on my website. And yeah, hit me up if you've got any questions, or also, if you've got any examples of your favorite experimental comics. I love seeing that.
And then, and all of those links are down below as well. And again, it is Will Eisner Week, so happy Will Eisner Week to you and to everybody watching this. Again, if anyone would like to read a copy of Visitations #1, please feel free to email me at visitationscomicbook@gmail.com, and that link is below. And we're going to wind this up here. So thank you very much, Karrie. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so glad we finally got to chat.
Yeah. And thanks everyone.